Cormac, I passed.
You passed. I didn't even see the obituary.
Passed my final inspections today. Oh my goodness.
Final inspections for this phase, but
For phase 0.1.
I'm sorry. I always look for the yes, but it's only.
Yeah.
What a project manager.
I could bring up your recent submittal woes.
Hey, so you passed.
We passed, yeah. Changing the subject. I was just kind of thinking through the process up here, and I live in an unincorporated part of the county. And so the building department is in the county records area,
Okay.
building and planning, and pull permits. And I thought it would be fun to kind of go through the process of what this first taste of doing something like this in Oregon is like. It just seems very different. And it's way different than commercial projects or public projects for obvious reasons. We just added a bathroom to the house. But just living in a more rural area and that side of things. So we go to the county and we take out our 3 different permits we need. So as a homeowner, you can pull your own permits, or if you hire a contractor, they have to pull the permits. So we did this project, and so we pulled the permits. And
So you're CMing, you're GCing, not GCing.
You could do that, but I think you're mainly doing the work. So yeah, we definitely had some help along the way because there's people who do things better than I do in different trades. So definitely brought that in. But the whole idea of, you go in for a permit without any drawings at all, and you say, we're going to add a bathroom to the house in the existing footprint, not an addition, anything like that. And you get 3 different permits for that. You get a plumbing permit, you get an electrical permit, and you get a mechanical permit. Nobody asks at all what this thing is going to look like. There's no talk of that at all.
Did you do any framing of any kind?
Yeah, we did.
And so you don't have to do
Nope, nothing at all. And so I'm sure the inspectors are just like, they see whatever they see when they go there, and they pay attention to whatever they pay attention to. And they pass or fail you based on what they see in the moment. And they don't care about knowing what they're going to see before they go there. So they just kind of take it in as it hits them. There's like all these things that you could fictitiously kind of make up ahead of time. Oh, they're going to look at this, and they're not going to like this, and they're not going to like that. And it's like when they actually come, they're just looking at what they look at. And I think they would prefer not to talk to you at all. And that's how it seemed to me. And not only that, but it's like, you don't know what they're going to notice. You don't know what they're going to look at or call you out for or anything. And so, of course, we want to do it right, and we want to do it well, and we don't want to have any issues. And so I obviously made small talk and had great conversations with these different inspectors, but it was still really interesting just to go through the process. So we had to get a rough inspection and a final inspection for those 3 disciplines. And they told us that all the inspectors are cross-trained, cross-discipline. So basically, you set an appointment on the day before you want them to come, and you can set it for 1 or all 3 or 2 of the 3, whatever you want. Just show up.
So Oregon Bob inspector can come out, and he's looking at plumbing or...
Yeah, plumbing or mechanical or electrical. Yeah. And so they're training a new guy to do just the plumbing part of it. So they didn't set it up so that they just signed off on all 3. Like they explicitly said, the plumbing guy's following me in 30 minutes. And because they're training him and we want him to get a lot of experience, we want him to see a lot of things and get a bunch of permits under his belt, which makes sense, right? Because he's a new guy on the team and that's his specialty background. So that's how they're giving him more seat time. They show up and they do the rough inspections. What does rough inspection mean to you? This is where I think the conversation could be kind of interesting, because as an architect, thinking about the things we're not allowed to think about, means and methods, thinking about, we do think somewhat about sequencing, but we're not responsible for it when it comes to like the actual construction of the project. What does that mean to you?
Talking about a rough inspection?
Rough inspection. Yeah. What do you think the level of completion is at a rough inspection? So let's just say electrical.
I'd say electrical. You've got your boxes put in there. You've got your conduit run. Maybe you've got your wires pulled from the box to the outlets. It's everything up to probably final connection.
Okay. And what do you think it means for plumbing?
My guess would be is that, say, like, if you got underslab, you got all of your underslab laid out so that they can inspect it before you pour a slab. You've got your drains. You've got essentially everything up until final connection.
Yeah, what do you mean by laid out for the underslab?
You actually have like your drains, your traps, your all your horizontals, like everything run, and all a full rough in of everything before it gets covered up.
And then so far as fixtures and things go, obviously those aren't in yet, right?
And yeah, I mean, to me, that would be part of your final inspection where fixtures are in and all of that other stuff. And so that you can actually test to see if like all of your water and all your water connections and all that other stuff. But, they're still testing all of that stuff as part of a rough inspection before you close up like walls. And see, I'm used to seeing several layers of a rough inspection. You've got your underslab, you've got your verticals, so like your in-wall stuff, making sure that, anything above ceiling, anything before it gets covered up, in my opinion, is a rough inspection.
Okay. And so then for final category, mechanical, same thing.
I didn't know I'm taking an ARE.
You're taking an ARE. Welcome to building systems.
Okay, so building systems, you're talking rough in or final?
Yeah, rough in still. For mechanical.
Rough in, same thing. It's everything that's run before it gets covered up. So, your ductwork, your condensate lines, any kind of piping that you would have that, ultimately will be covered over by a ceiling or a wall or...
So my wife and I had a difference of opinion here. I was assuming it was way less than anything you just said, because if you don't do it right, you got to undo it. That's how construction works. And there is no checklist anywhere for what those two terms mean. And every inspector has a variance in opinion on what those things mean, it seems to me. I mean, they're all on the roughly the same page, but different inspectors look for different things than their counterparts. And you'll hear different pieces of that story from different ones. She thought it meant basically what you just said, if I'm interpreting her interpretation correctly. We scheduled the rough inspection, and the inspector shows up. It seemed he was not having a good day.
Uh-oh.
Yeah, exactly. He walks in, and this is our first experience with an inspector here. And he's like, I'm going to have to come back another time. He's like pointing at this piece of electrical. So we had all the underslab plumbing done, right? All the connections into the existing underslab pipe for a toilet, for a sink, for a shower tub combo. And which was no small feat, like excavation and exploratory surgery of a slab to find where these lines are was not fun. And then there was the wiring is close to where it needed to be, but it's like, again, I'm kind of assuming, the stub outs are there for plumbing and for boxes in the ceiling for the fan and the light, but no ductwork run yet, because when the inspector comes, to me, it's an opportunity to say, hey, what do you think about doing it like this so that I do it right the first time? Okay.
Right.
But it was not like that at all. It was like, you didn't do it right. You get 3 fails and then you get like flagged. And so it was super stressful, because it was like you failed on all 3 disciplines the very first time, because we just didn't have it all hooked up. And I thought it was weird, because when I think rough inspection, like obviously you're not putting a toilet in yet because you don't have flooring in it. You're not putting a tub in yet because you don't have the drain exactly located yet. You can't put several things in because you just can't. But stub outs were not enough. It had to be basically done for that discipline to be rough inspected.
So done but not covered?
Correct. Done but not covered.
Sometimes I've seen that too, where it may not be fully like tied in, or fully tied in. And again, a lot of times it's just dependent on, and you are definitely highlighting and pinpointing that it depends on the jurisdiction.
There's that. And I guess I'm just highlighting this from an architect's point of view and just not knowing what we don't know. And there's definitely like a person-to-person network kind of a thing when it comes to this, right? Those inspectors know all the contractors who do the work. They don't know all the homeowners, but the contractors know what the inspectors are looking for because they've had this experience. And so I just think it's interesting because there is kind of all of this, I don't know, like expectation that people just
Mhm.
know because the people that they normally work with already know. And we don't.
So there was nothing given to you as the person pulling the permit.
Absolutely nothing.
So they were essentially assuming that you knew exactly what when they said, hey, if you call for a rough-in inspection, this is the level of
Right.
expectation that we have for you.
You know what that
That's
means
just,
in this jurisdiction for the
yeah.
people who are going to look at it.
I would say that, again, I've had varying experiences with any of like the residential stuff that I've done, and definitely a different experience with the commercial work, depending on where we're at in the jurisdiction and the inspector, because it sounds like you're also somewhat at the mercy of the inspector and
Yeah.
the inspector's good or bad day.
Yeah. So let's get back to the bad day part. Inspector number one, he's like, oh, I can't sign off on this plumbing because you don't have a, and this is where he starts to use the plumbing lingo. You don't have 10 feet ahead.
Okay.
And I'm like, okay, so explain to me what that means. Right. And so what he said was, you need to have all of your vent pipes and
Yeah.
your drain pipes full of water 10 feet above the floor line. And so then I proceeded to ask him, I said, how do you do that? So this is a renovation. This is an existing house. This is not a greenfield construction site. There is no way to stop the stuff from flowing out of the sewer pipe. There's no mechanism. There's no like guillotine that I could, like little gate that I could drop like I can on my RV to stop the stuff from flowing out of it, right? That doesn't exist in the house, right? There are clean outs, but there are not like stoppers that you can put in. I said, how do you do that? He's like, yeah, that's going to be tricky. And he seriously didn't say anything after that.
Well, that's going to be tricky.
And I said, so how do you fill the pipes? Okay, so again, like if you expect to see the pipes all done up, right? So you've got all these 1.5 ABS vent lines,
Right.
and you got some 2-inch vent lines, and then you've got some 3 and 4-inch outlet pipes and all this stuff. I said, you expect to see all that airtight so that it can hold water, right, 10 feet above the floor line.
Yeah.
No, first of all, these pipes are opaque, right? Like you can't actually see how much water
Right.
is in them if there was water in them anyway. And I said, how do you fill those up? I said, like, what do? Do you go up on the roof and you fill it with a hose from the vent popping out the roof? He goes, yeah, that's usually what they do. And I'm like, huh. Like,
But
so
okay,
what?
so like,
You just want to fill all your pipes with water, assuming you could stop it, okay? You want to fill all your pipes with water until what? Until it overflows out of the vent pipe on the roof? And like, again, existing house. What if, now I don't want leaks in my vent pipes. What if there is one? What if there is one where I can't get to it? Then what?
but like when he's saying 10 feet ahead on a sealed system, I mean, what they're doing is they're testing the pressure in the system, make sure that all of the, connections and everything else are meeting. But seriously, going up on the roof and pouring a hose down the vent drain, applying the amount of pressure that it
Well,
needs to
he's
test.
assuming you can stop it like somewhere, right? So that it would just hold that water and it would sit there for a while until you pull the stopper and then it all drains out just to make sure it's not leaking anywhere. The other way to do this is with an air pressure test. But from what I did a little looking things up, and it looks to me like you're not allowed to air pressure test ABS. You can air pressure test metal pipe, galvanized pipe, iron pipe, but you're not supposed to air pressure test ABS. And even if I was a little unclear, but it was a very low amount of pressure too. It was like 5 pounds. So anyway, long story short, it's like, how are you going to do that? Yeah, that's going to be tricky. Well, okay, so there's two things you got to solve for. You got to plug it up and you got to fill it. And I can figure out the filling part, but the plugging up part, yep, that's going to be tricky. And it's like, see you next time. That was it. And I was just like, whoa, that was a bad first experience with an inspector. And what if he comes back the next time? Was my next thought. Anyway, yeah, I'll take questions at this time.
I was going to say you passed. So obviously, what did you do?
Yeah, so I buttoned all of those systems up and finalized them. And It's interesting because when they come back, the next time the guy came back, it was a different guy for all three disciplines. So it was three other guys who came in for each system, even though we had scheduled them all on the same day. And even though we were told that they would be cross-disciplinary, they were doing this training thing with this new guy. So they didn't want to take his job away from him. So basically got to talk and meet these three other guys, and they were all great guys, really nice, really low key, and very helpful in contrast to the first guy who
So
came in.
they explained to you, what it means for 10 feet ahead and all that other.
They came in, I had basically buttoned everything up, and it was like I specifically signed up for a mechanical and an electrical inspection, but not a plumbing inspection. So that when the inspector came, my thinking was, I'm going to pick his brain about the plumbing because he's not going to be giving me an X mark for something I can't solve on the plumbing. All I'm going to do is talk to him about it. So that was the plan. And the guy came in and he was like, I don't really think that's doable on a house renovation project with you as a homeowner. So I would give you a pass on that. And I'm like, well, how can I guarantee that you'll be the guy who will come? And he's like, yeah, you can't do that. No, oh no, it's like you're playing roulette with the guy who will pass you. Long story short, it was interesting that when the plumbing guy came, he didn't ask about that at all. He looked at other stuff.
Was it the same guy?
No, it was a different guy. So
Different
that's
from the other guy from the other guy?
Yes.
So this is guy number 3.
It was guy number 3 or 4, like depending on the order, okay. Right? So yes, and so everybody did have comments, but they were like, you can overcome this by doing this, very helpfully. It was like I had run 3-inch exhaust tubing for my exhaust fan, and he said, new code is it's got to be smooth and 4-inch, or it can be flex 5-inch. So at least he told me like exactly what it needs to be based on the code, and I had to rip out the ductwork. So this is like I was full on contractor, right? It was like it didn't pass inspection. I had to rip it out and do it again. Got all that done. I had sealed it up with duct tape, 3M, the good stuff. Not acceptable. You have to actually use like foil tape. You had to take all the tape off and do that again. But luckily, instead of him just taking off marks, he said, just text me a picture and I'll sign off on it. That was super cool.
See, now, when you're talking about duct tape for a duct, I automatically think of the foil tape, not duct tape.
Well, when you're in that aisle at Home Depot, guess what is right next to the ducts? It is the
duct
tape,
the
3M duct
the
tape.
plastic.
Yeah. They have both of them there. But it's like, which one are you going to buy? The $25 roll or the $6 roll? Yeah.
You bought the $31 roll.
I probably did.
Because you bought the $6 roll and both. The $25 roll.
Yeah. So that was rough inspections, and it was rough. These were seriously rough inspections. I learned a lot. And it just makes me think about the education of an architect. It makes me think about what we don't know about how things are actually built, even though I feel like I have a lot of building experience. I don't have a lot of all of the kinds of building experience. I definitely don't have a lot of these kinds of systems, installation and design experience, whereas I do have a lot more framing experience, for example, and things like that.
So that's interesting, though, because I truly feel that there's a knowledge difference between somebody who spends most of their career as a residential architect and, somebody who spends most of their career as a commercial architect, because there are going to be some things that residential architects will know that commercial won't know, because they're hands-on a lot of times with the contractor talking through a lot of these smaller issues.
Sure.
We don't spend a lot of time sitting there with the mechanical contractors or the plumbing contractors really talking through a lot of that stuff, because, structural, maybe your facades, your window guy and all this other stuff. Yeah. But because of larger scale, a lot of times we don't really spend a lot of time. Now, I've spent some time with a lot of like the adaptive reuse, learning a lot of this. but probably not as much as if I was just a commercial architect versus a residential architect who will learn a lot more about the mechanicals. Now, a lot of times they're the ones designing it. A lot of times they don't have engineers. They are the engineer for a lot of that
Yeah,
stuff.
exactly.
And so they have to learn all of that.
I have that sense too. And I don't know how true this comment will be. My sense is that it's more true than not. But it's the idea that those architects are doing their own CA. If, again, I don't know for sure. I'm sure a lot of architects don't get hired to do CA phase on their projects, but they do get out there and they see the installations and they're doing project after project. Whereas like in the public work realm that I come from, you have a CA person who goes to a weekly OAC, owner architect contractor meeting, and goes through all the issues and walks the site. And that is one person of a very large team. And that very large team never does that except for maybe twice during the whole thing. So when you don't get out there and get that site visit experience and you don't see it at all those different phases, the primary steel going up, and then you start to see some of the systems going, you see the wall framing, then you start to see the electrical, then you don't see all those. You just don't know this stuff, right? And so again, you're hiring a consultant to do your electrical engineering. You're hiring a consultant to do your plumbing. You're hiring a consultant to do your HVAC, your structural, all those things where, like you said, when you're doing residential, a lot of times you're probably doing most of that just as the architect. Yeah. So we got to the point where we called for the final inspections. And, again, you kind of just hope that the cool guys show up when you do this. And they did. And so I'm happy to report past final inspections. And, they want to see it once it's all buttoned up. So kind of just demystifying the inspection process. They want to see it once during the rough to make sure all the stuff is put in correctly and that it's airtight and that the wiring's done right and the switches are in and the outlets are in and all of those things. And then final is drywall's up, floors in, fixtures are in place, you can turn them all on, the light switch cover plates are on to that level. So then you can actually get signed off. So it is like done. So I think the main thing there is like making sure you didn't add anything else or take anything away or anything like that, that trying to pull a fast one on them. They just want to make sure that it was a completed project exactly as intended.
Okay.
Phase 0.01 is done.
Exactly. And this is for your bathroom.
It was an additional bathroom. Yeah.
Okay. And so the next adventure.
I had an electrician come today for a bid because we got to add like multiple circuits to our downstairs area. So that would be the next phase, and like a 60 amp panel that's extended from the main panel. So you're talking about some pretty heavy duty wire running it like 60 feet through soffits, and I'm not going to do that.
Yeah, I was going to say, so where do you feel like your limitations are in doing a lot of this stuff?
Time is the biggest limitation. I know that's not the question you were really asking, but that is the biggest answer is time.
Yeah, I understand the situation, so I get it. Because, there are so many things. So, like I'm looking at, obviously, doing some renovation or just finishing out the basement. Everything about the upstairs are pretty well done enough. There are things in the future that I'll probably change. Yeah, make it a little bit more of my own, but nothing urgent. All of that is perfectly serviceable. Everything looks nice. It was a move-in ready home, even though it was a 1941 thing. But, the basement's unfinished now. Good thing is the basement's actually got a decent size floor to underside of structure. So I can, comfortably fit it out and have a decent downstairs. Plus, I kind of have like a couple of different realms of things, like say when you come out to Old Detroit for a visit, got a place to put you. But I play in my head, what can I do versus what am I going to have somebody else do? And of the things that I think I'm going to need to have somebody else do, I always ask myself this question, am I sure that I can't do that?
I have always done that, the try it first thing, and figure out if this is something you'll ever do again. So there are things I won't do again. And I'm sure I've mentioned them before, but it's like I will never do a roof again. I've done a roof once. I will never, ever do a roof again. I realize that I'm not the drywall artist. I'm no Michelangelo when it comes to mud and drywall. And man,
Hmm.
there are people who are just so good at that I want a smooth finish, that I
The
hired a
level
guy
five.
and I got a level 5 finish, right? Like it's one of those things where it's like they have the technique because they have the 10,000 plus hours doing the thing. And so I'll do electrical, I'll do plumbing, I'll install closet doors, I'll seal and stain, and I'll hang cabinets and all kinds of stuff. But when it comes to like really detailed drywall finish work, I won't do that. If it was wood, okay, I'll do that. And I think the other question you kind of have to ask yourself is how many tools are you willing to buy and potentially never use again? I have a lot of those for sure, because there are a lot of specialty tools that just make things go way better when they're used correctly. And knowing even what those tools are is part of it, or being able to repurpose some tool that you have to almost be as good as the real thing is another way.
Right.
So it's another thing to take into account. It's just like, do you have the time? How cheap are you? If you are super cheap, then you are going to do it yourself, and you can rent certain tools and things like that. And there is YouTube, and you can learn how to do stuff. And if you like to do things with your hand, I think that you should do it, right? Because you're going to learn more than just getting it done. You're going to learn through the process. And that is going to make you a better architect in the future, because the next time you draw something, you're going to think about it differently, approach it
Oh,
differently.
absolutely.
So it's a huge piece of it. And I encourage that. I think the farther we get away from actually the hands-on part, the worse off we are as a profession. And I
Yeah.
know that
Yeah.
there's this huge aversion to risk, and there's legal, and there's all these things, but like if you can do it yourself in your own place and you're not learning that stuff on the job, I think, yeah, like it is going to make you a more valuable architect as well. So those are kinds of the main questions I would ask myself: is how cheap am I? How much time do I have? How much money do I have? How many tools am I willing to buy? How much time am I willing to spend learning how to do this? And what if I have to tear it out and do it again? It's like those are kind of the main questions I would ask.
I love that you said all of that stuff, because we often look at, or at least I look at, the knowledge base of architects of yesteryear versus the knowledge base of the architects of today. And it is not an apples to apples comparison, for the simple fact that we have such differing technologies in the way that things are built, in the performance standards of the products that we select and put on buildings, and just so many different things that we can talk about. But the one thing that I always look at, and I remember my first job, one of the things that I had to do was, and yes, this is how old I am, is had to run some blue lines, actual honest to goodness blue lines of old projects, because they wanted to archive a lot of stuff.
Unventilated room.
Not ventilated, you come out high as a kite or sick as a dog.
Learn how to hold your breath for as long as possible.
But what I'm getting at is that, as I'm archiving all of these projects, I'm thinking about, wow, there's so few actual sheets created for this project. And these projects aren't any smaller than some of the commercial projects that I work on. Granted, my current project was an anomaly of the, several thousand sheets, because it's an 8-building brand new university. So that's a different case all of its own. But it's still, when I compare that set to projects of yesteryear, and I look at that, the biggest thing is the knowledge that you're talking about that you didn't have when they were asking about, do you do 10 feet of head, and all of these other things, or all the different roughing questions that you were talking about, and what does that mean, and all of this other stuff. They knew all of that. It was back in the day when the architect was the master builder. It was back in the day when there was a level of knowledge that architects had of the construction building trades that we just don't have. And to me, it's not a catch-all, because there are definitely tons and tons of architects out there, and mostly they're sole practitioners or small businesses that do smaller projects, that they do all of the engineering drawings, or at least a good portion of them, and would do a lot of on-site work and stuff, and are more of hands-on work.
I love watching Steve Basek's channel on Instagram. He's kind of one of those guys. Yeah. Put a link to that.
There's this, and you said it, you hit on exactly why we don't do that anymore. And it came down to liability, and you don't want to assume certain liabilities. Now that there are the trades of electrical, plumbing, mechanical engineers, structural engineers, civil engineers, and all of this other stuff, we don't want to do all of that.
Not only that, but those are an enormous undertaking as well.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
It's a literal crap ton of work.
I have a set of drawings of a extraordinarily large church in Montgomery, Alabama. And that set of drawings was 8 sheets of architectural. And
Well, those
most of
sheets
them
were
were
10
these,
feet by 20 feet.
they weren't that big. But I mean, the interesting thing about it is that it was more an exercise. Like now it's an exercise of modeling, and you got to model all of this stuff in. And back then it was just an exercise of line weights. Anyway, whatever. But yeah, you see where I'm going. It's like that architect spent more time out on the job site than they did on the set of documents that they created, because they were going to sit there and work hand in hand with the contractor to say, okay, here created what we would love to do today is just create essentially design intent documents and let it be figured out on the job site or through a few little bit of engineering stuff. And I mean, yeah, but again,
I want to push back on your idea of this master builder thing. I don't think we've been master builders for extremely long. And I think, though, that it was like that 13 sheet set. The only reason those got built was because they had such an amazing contractor who was willing to work with them and figure that stuff out and make it match the vision of the design intent. It's like, I remember when I started, HVAC was single line drawings, right? It was very much, we're going to figure this out on the site. And it was like, there was an understanding of like what was necessary to run ducts and electrical and plumbing and sprinkler and all these things in the ceiling. And we needed enough space for that, but there wasn't any clash detection, right? Like there was none of that. And so because it was like, no, you knew you could rely on the contractor to figure this out because they were amazing at what they're doing. And they're not going to look for ways to nickel and dime the client through change orders through this adversarial construction process. And that's very different today.
Yeah. One of my favorite things to do when we're looking for engineers is look for engineers who are design minded, who are going to be a teammate. I was about to say team player, but a teammate of yours. They have as much of a design mind as you do when it comes to how they can contribute to the overall aesthetic of this. It's not just, hey, I'm going to just run a bunch of ductwork and call it done. They're going to say, okay, I see the vision that you're trying to create. Here's how I can help you with that. And if I come up with some problem that says, hey, Evan, the way that we would normally run the ductwork through here would affect this part of your design. Do we want to try to do something else that you conceal it somewhere else? Might add a little bit more run to it, or it might be a little bit more difficult. Or do we want to come up with something a little bit different in the design?
Yeah, I love that.
And having those conversations is, to me, some of the best parts of the overall project.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, as you're right, we don't have that anymore.
I've experienced that for sure. I have no idea if it's still like that or not. But man, you're right. Those are the best times working on a project, is solving those kinds of problems together. I feel like that is the nirvana of working on projects with extended teams. There's a quote from a structural engineer, Hanif Kava, I think is his name. And he said, the best architects create great problems to solve. And it was basically like, I want to work with architects who have interesting problems to solve. I don't want to just work on steel buildings the rest of my life. I don't want to work on whatever's the easiest or the most efficient or the thing I can charge the most for the least. It was like, I want to work on interesting stuff. And to me, those are the kinds of moments that you're talking about, is when I've had that exact experience with structural engineering. And you pose a question like, well, what if we punch a hole in the wall and we backspan the beam this far? Could we then cantilever it out and do this thing? And he's like, yeah. You just see them light up and they're like, well, that's a cool idea. I haven't done that on a project before. And it's like, okay, now the gears are turning. This is going to be a cool experience. And I'll even take that one further. That guy's boss then at one point took him off the project, and we're like, why'd you take him off the project? It was going so well. And he's like, he was spending too much time on your project.
You're like, yeah, but we want him back.
Oh my gosh. It's so deflating. You finally find an engineer on this that actually wants to do these really great design problems. He wants to figure them out, and then he's not allowed to by the boss.
Some of my favorite projects are when I get to expose the structure. And obviously, when you're exposing the structure, it changes it to a completely different level of finishing that exposed structure. And when you get a chance to do that, this exactly what you just said is that the structural engineers get so excited because now they get to design. They
They're
don't
so
just,
used to us just covering up their stuff
exactly.
that
It's not
in
going to
the
be just
model,
this generic plates.
when it's like a brace frame building and they don't model in the knife plates, and then
Exactly.
they show up on site and you're like, whoa, those things are the size of a semi truck. Where those, and they're like, well, people just cover them up.
Yeah.
So we don't model them. This was back in the day. We don't model them. And it's like, oh, I wish I would have known that those were going to be there. Yeah, just a different side of that coin that you're talking about.
Yeah.
There's a huge value in that kind of collaborative experience, in the hands-on side of actually building things, having to figure it out. I can't tell you how many times we went downstairs and it's like, how are we going to do this? Because again, we didn't have any, we had some drawings. My wife and I drew this thing up, but it was very rudimentary, just so that we understood what we were getting into and how the layout was going to work. But it wasn't like we hadn't figured out how the duct was going to run from the ceiling fan over to the chase. It was like,
right.
You figured that out in real time as we went and thought we had solved it 4 different ways before we actually solved it. And that to me is an invaluable experience when it comes to being an architect, because you're going to take that with you and you're going to apply it to projects. And this is not the kind of thing that anybody teaches an architect in school, an architect in training.
No.
None of this. These are super valuable experiences. And this is why I really advocate for architecture students to intern in construction if you possibly can, because you're going to learn so much about actually getting architecture built. And we all know if it doesn't get built, it doesn't count.
So. Exactly. I think every architect should do their own home renovations, because then they'll actually see, one, okay, if I can't understand how to put stuff together, how am I going to expect other people to do that? You know, like yours, you were talking about knowing where your limitations are, knowing what you can do, what you can't do, but also knowing what actually everything that all of your intentions, all of your design intentions, what does that actually mean in the real practice of getting them out?
I'll tell you what,
them built.
What just crossed my mind as you were saying that is we actually learn the value of compromise.
Yeah.
Because
yes.
when you're designing, like, you could just not compromise, right? And you can be that designer, you could be that architect. And then there's like actually having to build something. And there's a trade-off, not only in outcome, but in craftsmanship, what you're actually capable of producing. Right. And that obviously changes over time. And it's like level of detail when it actually comes to finishing it's difficult. Like, how do you get there? And you could watch a lot of videos and try to figure, or you can just try. And I think part of it is just like getting comfortable living with it. Because when you draw stuff, it is so perfect, right? It is like gnat's ass right on the money. It's like the line work is perfect. The dimensions between the things are all perfect, and they're square and they're level and they're all these things. And then you actually go in to do it and the materials aren't straight. And the slab's not flat, and the walls aren't straight, and they put a little too much mud on the drywall before, so it bulges out here, and you got to bend something around it, kind of. If you got to fill the gaps with caulk, you got to do all this stuff, and it's like you kind of learn just like the give and take of construction and architecture, and again, is super valuable because it sets realistic expectations when you go on a site visit and you see the labor that somebody else has done and what it took to get there, and whether you just dismiss it or reject it or accept it. Just think it makes you more, I don't know, more human.
But it also, in a way, it also teaches you, where do you spend your time on the drawings? What should you care about, and what maybe you want to just ease up a little bit instead of drawing everything to the gnat's ass, nth degree. Maybe you don't need to do it here because this is going to be a pretty standard installation of some partition. And then other times it's going to be, okay, I really want this to be perfect. I want this to be book matching wood paneling, or you want to do this or that or something. And then you really kind of like spend your time thinking about those particular details. Because I sit there and I looked, like, reviewing all of the documents of a huge, large complex of buildings in my current case. And you're looking at all of these details, and every one of these details, there's so many different unique things about them and all that other stuff. And you think about it, it's like, why are all of these unique, why are these similar conditions drawn uniquely? Let's spend more time kind of making things uniform and then spending more time on those one-off things, making sure that those are right. You don't have to mandate every single solitary wall in there, because the guy who's going to be putting them up has put up so many more walls than you've ever drawn.
Yep.
So why spend all of the time suffering over those when what you really want to suffer over, the stuff that you really can see and touch and feel and stuff? Those are the things that you should really. And so you're talking about compromise. It's also, where do you put where do you
Your
put that
energy.
effort?
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah, I agree with that, because not everything is worth it. And so kind of
Yep.
picking the things that really need to shine, and I was going to say more of like intangibles, like how does this space make you feel, is the kind of stuff that where architects really add value
Yeah.
beyond just how did the pieces go together, if they were absolutely perfect or not. Like there's a new Morphosis museum in Orange County, and a lot of people are like focused in on the way the sheet metal is coming together at this really odd geometry. And it's
Mhm.
like, yeah, but like step back and look at it or walk through it. And those are the experiences that most people have. As an architect, yeah, we tend to zero in on the corner detail and the way that these three materials come together. And should we? Yeah, I guess we should, but we should also look at, this is something architects are really good at, zooming in and zooming out and zooming in and zooming out, but not cherry picking the one thing to be the critic about because you wished you had you had done that project. I think that there's always a little bit of envy in there, but even if it's not your aesthetic, it's still a piece of architecture that kind of matters, right? It's like one of those things where it's like, how is it serving the public, serving these other purposes other than like, how did the two corners come together? So I don't know.
Right.
We could go down another rabbit hole there, but this is yet again been another episode of Evan does construction on his house and learns along the way. So thanks for joining me in my ongoing journey.